David, how you doing, my brother?
Good, man. How
Yeah,
are you?
I'm well, man. Look forward to continuing to keep the pace here. Things we began session 4 Monday night, looking at rebellion, judgment, and election. So, friends, today we're going to continue to really hone in on a specific portion of what we discussed Monday evening. And I'm just going to give a little bit of background and pitch this over to David Rickman so that he can give us a little more technical and textual background to this Deuteronomy 32, verse 8. I think it would be very helpful for us to grasp what's going on there because we're building sound teaching from these things. So we want to be clear. We want to be concise. We want to be accurate as we handle the Word of God with integrity. I think a big piece here is to give a little bit of background to this Deuteronomy 32. I want to go back and talk just for a couple of moments about the issue of the sons of Elohim. And we've done some pretty extensive background here, but just this one piece in terms of what is the function of what's known as Psalm 82 and Psalm 89. What's the function of those sons of Elohim, divine, lesser created beings, but a title that's been given to them, taken from Psalm 82, Psalm 89, called the divine council. Yahweh has a divine council, these sons of Elohim. And I want us just to look at a couple passages that will kind of frame this again. One of those, we've looked extensively, to some extent anyway, at Psalm 82, but I'm going to read from Psalm 89 again. Psalm 89, verses 5 through 8. And the heavens will praise your wonders, O Yahweh, your faithfulness also in the assembly of the holy ones, in the divine council of the sons of Elohim. This is what he's alluding to there. Verse 6, for who in the skies, notice this term, who in the heavens, who in the skies is comparable to Yahweh? Who among the sons of the mighty is like Yahweh? A God, an Elohim, greatly feared in the council, in the divine council of the holy ones, and awesome above all those who are around him. O Yahweh Elohim of hosts, who is like you? O mighty Yahweh, your faithfulness always also surrounds you. What a great passage just to put together that Psalm 82, 1 through 8, Psalm 89, 5 through 8. I think those really give us some great understanding to this divine council, which are the sons of God, the sons of Elohim. There's some other passages, and I just would like to highlight another one. Psalm 95, verse 3 says, for Yahweh is a great God, a great Elohim, and a great king above all gods, above all the other Elohim, all the other created beings. Also, Psalm 97, verse 7 through 9. Let all those be ashamed who serve graven images, who boast themselves of idols. Worship him, Yahweh, all you gods, all you other Elohim. Verse 9, for you are Yahweh most high over all the earth. You are exalted far above all gods, all the other sons of Elohim. I think those give us some real background that there is a divine council that Yahweh gave what we understand decisions and delegated authority to these sons of Elohim over the heavens. They make decisions with Yahweh. And again, I want to give these three passages. We're not going to read them, but the word us is used. It's Yahweh, including the divine counsel in his decision making, like in Genesis 1:26, Genesis 3:22, and Genesis 11:7. When he says, "Let us go down and scatter and divide," and at the Tower of Babel, it's Yahweh making a decision with these divine beings. So we see that the divine council, the sons of Elohim, they make decisions, and then thirdly, they are given delegated authority. And this is going to bring us right in now to what we've been talking about. So as we've trekked through a little bit Monday night, we were looking at Genesis 10 and Genesis 11. We began seeing like the setting up of the 70, what's known as the Table of Nations. And then we coming out of that, of course, is the Tower of Babel event. And it's there that we see more of like what's going on from an earthly perspective. But when we peer into some other passages like Deuteronomy 4 and Deuteronomy 32, we begin to see that there's something among these sons of God, the host of heaven, that are also involved with the dispersing of the nations. So I'm going to read Deuteronomy 4:19, and you're going to hear again that Yahweh is delegating authority to these sons of Elohim, to his divine counsel, and he is, well, let me just read the verse. Deuteronomy 4:19, he's speaking to Israel in the context, and he says, "Beware, Israel, lest you lift up your eyes to heaven and see the sun and the moon and the stars." And then he says, "And all the host of heaven," which we've understood as these part of the divine counsel, "and be drawn away and worship them and serve them, those which the Lord your God, Yahweh your Elohim, Israel, has allotted to the peoples under the whole heaven." So at the time of the Tower of Babel, at the separation and scattering of the nations, Yahweh allotted the sons of Elohim, the divine council, over these 70 nations. Okay. And then we turned and we looked also at Deuteronomy 32, verse 8. And if you guys will remember, I made this comment, and it may have threw some of you for a little loop, and that's okay. But in Deuteronomy 32:8, I encouraged, or I asked you guys, I think I did, but I told you what I did several years ago when I marked out the word Israel and actually put the gods there, or the word Elohim. And so we're going to go into the background, some technical and some textual background to understand why I would even make that suggestion. So let me read Deuteronomy 32, verse 8, and I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Rickman. "When the Most High, Elyon," speaking of Yahweh, "gave the nations their inheritance." Now we're speaking of that time of the 70, again, the Table of Nations, Genesis 10, and then the Tower of Babel incident or event, when Elyon gave the nations their inheritance, he separated the sons of man, or the sons of Adam. He set the boundaries of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God, or the sons of Elohim. And again, it's there where most of our translations have sons of Israel. So David and I have talked about this quite a bit over the last probably 5 years. And the revelation of this has been growing in my own heart and mind. But I wanted to pitch this to David to just begin talking through the more of the technical and kind of the textual background of what's happening here. One other thing, notice that once God or Yahweh assigns and he allots the nations as an inheritance to the sons of Elohim, to the divine council, then in verse 9, he says, but the Lord's, Yahweh's portion of the nations, Yahweh's portions is his people. Jacob is the allotment of his inheritance. And of course, we have Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, right? So we see that this is the origin of the Jewish narrative where Yahweh is saying, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Israel is my portion and the allotment of my inheritance. In strong, opposite, maybe not opposition, but in a strong way, verses verse 8. So we have verse 8 is the allotment of the nations, and verse 9 is Yahweh saying, "But Israel, Abraham, you are my portion and my inheritance." So David, man, take it away, brother. If you could just begin to speak to some of this, Deuteronomy 32:8, give us some of that textual background, man, that would help us understand why we would not understand this as the sons of Israel, but as the sons of God, the sons of Elohim.
Yeah, sure. So before we jump into there, I just want to revert back just a little bit, just one passage. And David, I think you had this in the notes the other night, but one other passage just to kind of show the allotment. Again, just want to hit this really quick before we move into 32, is Deuteronomy 29, verse 25 and 26. The context here, he's talking about the nation saying, "Why has the Lord done this terrible judgment and outburst of anger upon his own people?"
Yeah.
And it says that men will say, "Because they forsook the covenant of Yahweh, the God of their fathers, whom he made with them when he brought them out of the land of Egypt. They went and served other gods and worshiped them, gods they have not known, and whom he had not allotted to them."
Yes.
And so it's talking about these other gods that Israel's going after, and these are the gods that are allotted to these other nations, basically. But Israel's in covenant because Yahweh has chosen them as his portion, and so it's just another reference to kind of have that idea of the allotment. But really, when we get to Deuteronomy 32:8, and I'm hoping that maybe in this class, I don't know, we'll have to talk about it, David, and see, but I'm hoping that we'll really sit down more in Deuteronomy 32. I mean, I think Deuteronomy 32 is probably the most important chapter in the Tanakh. I mean, it's incredible. But the issue with what David brought up about the text and the sons of Israel and why it's not Israel here, or these ideas, is really kind of gets back into a little bit of a technical issue with texts and language and stuff, but it's not super complicated. What's going on here is, if you read, like for instance, your translation that we use a lot is New American Standard, it says that he set the boundaries according to the number of the sons of Israel, but other translations will say sons of God or sons of the Elohim. And what's behind this? The majority of translations use the Masoretic text, which is, it was copied between the 7th and 10th century, not BC, but Common Era. And so Masoretic means it has the idea of tradition. And so it was the kind of traditional text that Jewish scribes copied, and they actually, the original Hebrew text, if you ever look at a Hebrew Bible, it has all these dots all over the place.
Yeah.
And so the original text doesn't have the dots all those dots are the vocalization of the vowels and other things going on with it. But the original texts didn't have the vocalization of all the vowels, and the Masoretes were the guys who put those in there as this is the traditional reading that has been preserved orally, really. I mean, and textually, but this is how we pronounce the words, and this is, and they have a very specific way of going about that. And so a lot of your Old Testament Bibles are based on the Masoretic text. But that was the oldest manuscripts that we had going back to that time period until the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, which was like just groundbreaking. Mm-hmm. And actually what happened with that is that the Dead Sea Scrolls have texts that are older by almost a millennium than this here. And so we'll look at Dead Sea in a minute, but first of all, even before that, we had the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Hebrew, and it was done in the mid 3rd century BC. And if you ever see, if you're doing readings or whatever, the abbreviation for Septuagint is LXX, 70, because the tradition is that there were 70 Jewish scholars who came and translated this from Hebrew into Greek, which was the English of the day, so that everybody could access. Access the text. You don't have to learn Hebrew to be able to read this thing. And so in the Septuagint here, the LXX, they translate this part here that says, and his people Jacob became he set up the boundaries for the nations according to the number of the angels of God, is what it says in verse 8. And so it uses angels as kind of that loose term, like what we talked about before, where Elohim is kind of a catch-all term. It's almost like a title. It's like mom. It's like mom is a title, and a lot of different kids call mom, but there's all these different ladies that have different names, right? So Elohim is like that. It's kind of it has a catch-all aspect to it, and angels eventually in Greek kind of had that catch-all aspect to it. And
particularly as we got to the New Testament, this is why we find it in some of those texts that we've been talking about.
Yeah. Absolutely. Gotcha. Yeah. So here they translate this as according to the number of the angels of God, which is just communicating divine beings, which is what we've been talking about, these sons of the Elohim. And so all the way already at the New Testament period, the Septuagint is actually being used by so many Jews, and a lot of the New Testament, when they quote the Hebrew scriptures, they're quoting from the Septuagint in the quotations and stuff. So, and there's a lot of things around that too, but I'm not saying that they weren't using the Hebrew or didn't know that either. But anyways, so back to the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Dead Sea Scrolls was older than both the Masoretic thing, and then the Dead Sea Scrolls is actually, there's a fragment that was found for this verse in Deuteronomy. The Dead Sea Scrolls has texts from the Bible texts, but then there's also other texts of a community, that one of the major communities that existed during the time of Jesus. We know of the Pharisees and the Sadducees, but there's another community, and it's so crazy because it's like we didn't know anything about this community, and then all of a sudden, once the Dead Sea Scrolls are discovered, we know more about them than anybody else.
Became famous overnight.
Right? Yeah. I mean, we know about them more than the Pharisees. and more than the Sadducees, and it's so crazy. So anyways, there's a lot of their writings that are in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and that helps us understand what's going on in first century Judaism, and what was preserved in these really old. These are the oldest versions of the biblical texts, and so in the Deuteronomy 32 verse 8, it actually says B'nai Elohim in the fragment that was found. And these are, a lot of the texts are just, they're scrolls that have been stored in jars and caves for thousands of years. And so they're all like, they put them back together and trying to, there's just pieces all over the place. And so, but they were able to find this fragment that came from this portion of Deuteronomy
32. Wow.
And it's sons of God. So
David, also for our listeners, just a 30-second insert. Tell us a little bit of the background. Dead Sea Scrolls, when were they found?
So they were found in, I think it's right around 48? I think?
Somewhere right
47, 48. So, and they were found by Bedouins out in the Judean desert. And it's like a guy just found this cave, and all of a sudden he has these like really ancient documents. And so there's a lot of tradition because they were found, a lot of stories about it because they were found over time in different caves around the region. And so, and scholars have been working on this for years and years and trying to piece things together and understand, what's going on with the community. Did they have a library, or did they just bring books, scrolls there to hide them because the Romans were coming through in 68, yes. And they came and through the Judean desert area and destroyed a lot of things there on their way to Jerusalem in 70.
Yes.
And so, was it just a community thing? So we're learning a lot, there's a lot of research that's happening, but the manuscripts of the scrolls are published from what they found, that are is out there for people to engage. And so, it's amazing. And there's a lot of places with the scrolls where it just confirms, the text the Masoretic text that we had that was like the oldest kind of stuff that we had before. A lot of it's very similar, and then there are places where there's variances, and so it's important to like take these into consideration.
Yes.
But modern translations, like what a lot of modern translations take the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Septuagint into consideration when they're translating. And so some of them do and some of them don't. And so, for instance, like if you're reading Deuteronomy 32 in the ESV, it says the sons of God. So if you have an ESV version, English Standard Version, then it says sons of God. Also, the New Revised says that he fixed the boundaries of the peoples according to the number of the gods. Or the Net Bible says he set the boundaries of the peoples according to the number of the heavenly assembly. And so there's, all of these guys are taking into account some of these variant readings. And really, when you think about it, at the time of Babel, Israel didn't exist as a nation, And so it's likely that the Masoretic tradition, had to preserve this as Israel because maybe on theological grounds or whatever. There are traditions, there is the idea that Israel was the number 70, went into Egypt. At the end of Genesis and in Exodus, it says 70 people in all went down into Egypt, But it seems like here the context really is pre-Israel, and probably the reading of sons of God is most scholars now really advocate for that reading as the most likely reading for what's happening in Deuteronomy 32:8.
Yes.
So just some of these textual things, I know they can be complicated, but if you just think about it in terms of the history of it, Israel forms as a nation in the book of Exodus, kind of after this. And so it seems like Babel, God is separating things out and allotting things.
Mm-hmm.
And Babel is the context of this passage,
Gotcha.
And then he chooses, and it says Jacob is the allotment of his portion. So he's actually, he's choosing Abraham, right? But Jacob is connected to Israel, yes. And that, this is later on that he's writing about it to what began in Abraham moves forward to Jacob. And so, so hopefully that's helpful a little bit with just the idea of sons of God and some of the traditions, and the texts, and why you were saying mark it, you're not trying to tell people to mark out, the Bible, but really understanding that there are these other very legitimate readings of it that translations take into account when we're working from them. Wonderful.
Well, David, I know we need to kind of, we're as I said the other night, we're turning the corner. We've had these 3 rebellions, Genesis 1 through 11, over a period of 2,000 years. As I said the other night, it's almost as though Yahweh says, and I'm not putting words in his mouth, just kind of giving some language that it's almost like Yahweh says, 3 strikes and y'all are out. There's these 3 divine human rebellions. And by the time we get to the Tower of Babel, Yahweh is separating the nations. He's scattering the nations. He's a word that I think is a great word to use here. He's disinheriting the nations and allotting them to the sons of Elohim and giving the nations over to the sons of Elohim. So it's this, not only the sons of Elohim are given and allotted to the nations, but the nations are allotted to the sons of Elohim. And they are, what we would say, there's a disinheritance, almost a divorce going on there, because now Yahweh, as we said, turning the corner, Yahweh is now going to begin with the origin of one man. And again, we talked about this Monday evening, but he's going to begin with what we would call divine Jewish election. And so I'm going to go into a little bit of background thought, but David, I just want to ask you, just as we begin to turn the corner, what it's like, man, what's the big deal of like talking about the allotment of the sons of Elohim to the nations, and the nations to the sons of Elohim, the table of 70 nations disinherited, and now suddenly we make the turn of the corner, as it were, from Genesis 11 to Genesis 12. It's like, wow. I think God wants us to have the wow factor, because he's getting ready to say, here is my plan. Here is my election. Here's the way I'm going to begin to steward the nations. I'm going to do it with this one man, Abraham. So, David, any thought there as we begin to turn the corner, and then I'll come back and just begin to hit a few passages.
Yeah, I think that one thing that kind of hits home the point in some ways is that God has been working kind of on a universal scale,
yes,
like a cosmic kind of scale in Genesis, right? Up until this point, it's humanity, mankind, and his actions are not just with one man. I mean, obviously Adam at the beginning, but it's the idea of kind of a universal thing. And it's almost like he's like saying that I'm done working universally, in a sense. Mm-hmm. And what I'm going to do is, this is the way I'm going to work now. I'm going to choose one, and I'm going to bind myself in covenant with one. Yes. And then I'm going to create this context where everybody else can find blessing through the conduit of the one that I'm working with, through Abraham and his lineage, the nations can be blessed. And so it's actually, he's working universally through particularity, but through a particular, covenant.
Particular exclusively through this one nation.
Yeah. And he demands everybody else to humble themselves to the fact that he's doing it this way and actually turn and recognize that it's through this plan, and and that's the way that they can find blessing. And that's the way, moving forward, this is part of why, even it says the gospel preached beforehand to Abraham, all the nations can find blessing in Abraham and in Abraham's God.
Yes.
So,
wow.
Yeah.
So clear, man. It's so clear, but it's so confrontive. Yeah. When you use particularity or peculiarity or, exclusively, Yahweh says, this is the way I'm now going to work in this one nation. And man, it really takes some real humility and submission on our part to submit to God's way. Yahweh, this is his way of how he's going to do it. Well, guys, we're turning the corner to this Jewish narrative, and we're just going to touch on a couple things, but we're really going to carry this over into session 5 on moving toward Monday night. But I do want to look at the end of Genesis 11 because we get a little bit of the historical kind of background. Beginning in Genesis 11:24, Nahor lived 29 years, became the father of Terah. Nahor lived 119 years, became the father of Terah, and had other sons and daughters. And then Genesis 11:26, Terah lived 70 years, became the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Now, these are the records of the generations, and you see Abram used about half a dozen times up through verse 32. And so we're getting the background, historical lineage of Abram, of course, who came through one of Noah's sons, Shem. So this is the lineage that begins to unfold. If you also remember, I was quoting a passage just briefly, and I want to go back there again because I think it's significant, is Joshua 24, verse 2. It says, Joshua said to all the people, thus says Yahweh, the Elohim of Israel. From ancient times your fathers lived beyond the river, talking about the Euphrates, down in the region of Mesopotamia, namely Terah, the father of Abraham and the father of Nahor. And they served other gods, other Elohim. And it's as though Yahweh reaches down and says, I'm going to take this one man, Abraham, I'm going to bring him out of the nations, out of Babel, out of this region of Mesopotamia, and I'm going to call this one man to myself, and myself, I'm going to bind my name, the God of Israel, Yahweh. He's going to bind his name to this one nation through this one man, Abraham. And I think, David, I just think it's fascinating how God begins in such a slow process, such natural processes. He begins with one man and Sarah, and their, Abraham's 75. Sarah's I think around 65. She's barren. Abraham's really beyond the years of having children. So, and we may get into some of that, but it's just a fascinating way in which God, just even through natural processes, he begins to just bring forth the seed through this one man, Abraham. And so I want us to turn and just read this, this is the kind of the golden standard. This is that golden passage, Genesis 12. 1 through 3. Let's just read that together, and then we'll make a couple comments. So again, Genesis 12:1. Now Yahweh said to Abram, again, this is down in that region of Babylon or Mesopotamia. He says, Yahweh says to Abram, go forth from your country, from your relatives and from your father's house, which would indicate clearly, according to Joshua 24:2, even coming away from your father's house means leaving the gods of your father. Isn't that interesting? To the land which I will show you, and I will make you, Abram, I'm going to make you a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and so you will be a blessing. And I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you, I will curse. And in you, Abraham, all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So he scatters the nations, gives them as an allotment to the sons of Elohim over to the nations, and then he says, I want you for me and me for you, Abram. And actually, it's through you and your lineage, Abraham, that I'm going to turn and bless all the nations that I've separated and scattered. That makes sense, David. I mean, that's just what's going on. One other passage I want to get to is this Galatians 3, and just read it. And then, David, I'd just like for you to any kind of closing comments that you feel like you want to make here. But I want to read this because it's so interesting that the gospel, guys, think about this. The gospel is tied to this original calling out of Abraham and to the covenant that he makes with Abraham. And so I want to just read a couple verses from Galatians 3 and just highlight this. Galatians 3, verse 6. Even so, Abraham believed God, and it was reckoned to him as righteousness. Therefore, be sure, it is those who are of faith who are the sons of Abraham. And the scripture foreseeing that God would justify the Gentiles, the scattered, separated nations, by faith, Yahweh preached the gospel beforehand to Abraham, saying, all the nations shall be blessed in you. So this Genesis 12:3 is Yahweh preaching the gospel to Abraham, that all the nations are going to be blessed in you and through you, Abraham. Verse 9 of Galatians 3. So then, those who are of faith are blessed with Abraham, the believer. I just think it's just really interesting to begin putting some of this together, that even Paul would declare to us that the gospel itself is bound and tied to this very passage in Genesis 12, 1 through 3. And I think it's really crucial that we recognize the coming together of Abraham, Yahweh, the covenant that's going to be made with Abraham, and the gospel. All of these begin to come together as a reality, and we understand now again the some of the background as we turn the corner. Now we're looking at the origin. We're beginning to see the importance of Abraham and its connection to covenant and its connection to the gospel as we read Genesis 3. David, any closing comments connected to some of that, and maybe help set in motion for us as we move towards session 5 Monday night?
Yeah, so good. I think one thing I thought about when you were reading, and we were reading this verses here, one of the things that I did think about is how Abraham later, he serves as kind of a paradigm, a model, both for Israel, right, for the Jewish people, and for Gentiles. Mm. Because even for Gentiles later on, and this is like moving way ahead in the story, yeah. But even for Gentiles, Abraham leaving his country, leaving his family, go from your father's house and devote yourself like exclusively to this God, who later is identified as the God of Israel or the God of Abraham, and so it's like this exclusive devotion of leaving behind the other gods and tying yourself to this one God, that becomes a paradigm for Gentiles
Excellent.
turning to the God of Israel. It's they have to leave behind these other things, and then also, also for Israel. And so, but it's just amazing that this choice, that God's choice of this man and the way that he's bound up his promises to him, that, I mean, they'll carry forward into the age to come. I mean, it's incredible to think of it this way, that this thing that started out in Genesis as kind of cosmic scope, right? Like huge, universal, and it's like kind of narrowing down as we go a little bit. And then it kind of comes to these dramatic points of account. And, Genesis 10 and 11 give that, this is the last straw, so to speak, of working with this universal picture in this way, working universally in a universal way, I guess you could say. Yeah. And so now God's saying, I'm actually going to work in a specific, particular way, and I'm going to do the things universally through this. And so it's so amazing that it calls out one man, and then moves things forward, the story forward in this way. And so all the nations find their blessing by connecting to the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, and that drives the narrative forward, and that thing holds all the way through the narrative, even into the New Testament. The election and choice of Abraham, and then what comes forth from him, his lineage and the nation, the plan doesn't change around.
Yes,
like it continues on, moving forward. And so I think as we continue to move forward into the covenants and into Israel, I think that it's going to help us, orient ourselves even more in trusting the reliability of this one that called Abraham and his plan to do it through this people and the seed that's coming. And, we're just anchored into a much deeper story this way, than some other narrative that, maybe we've heard or kind of come about where we're kind of at the center of all of it, Yeah. So it's so powerful.
Gives some real richness and depth to our own heritage, right? Our own story. It's way beyond me. It's way beyond the Gordons or the Rickmans. We go way back, all the way back to Abraham. Well, Dave, I'm going to close our time by reading a passage from Deuteronomy 7, and because one of the questions that begins to come up is, why Israel? Why Abraham? And I think we get a little bit of an answer here, almost from God's perspective. So I just want to read this and let it close our time today. Deuteronomy 7, just a few verses. Verse 1, when Yahweh your Elohim shall bring you into the land where you are entering to possess it, and shall clear away many nations before you. And then he mentions about 7 nations. He says, verse 2, and when Yahweh your Elohim shall deliver them before you, you shall defeat them, then you shall utterly destroy them. You shall make no covenant with them, and shall show no favor to them. Furthermore, you shall not intermarry with them. You shall not give your daughters to their sons, and take their daughters for your sons. For they will turn your sons away from following me to serve other gods. Then the anger of Yahweh will be kindled against you, and he will quickly destroy you. Verse 5. But thus you shall do to them, you shall tear down their altars, smash their sacred pillars, hew down their Asherim, and burn their graven images with fire. Verse 6. For you are, Israel, a holy people to Yahweh your Elohim. For the Lord your Elohim has chosen you to be a people for his own possession out of all the peoples who are on the face of the earth. The Lord did not set his love. And I think this gives us a little bit of that, like answering why Israel. Deuteronomy 7:7. The Yahweh did not set his love on you, nor choose you because you were more in number than any of the peoples, for you were the fewest of all the peoples. But because Yahweh loved you and kept the oath which he swore to your forefathers, Yahweh brought you out by a mighty hand, redeemed you from the house of slavery, from the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Know therefore that Yahweh, your Elohim, he is God. He is Elohim, the faithful Elohim, who keeps his covenant and his loving kindness to 1,000 generations with those who love him and keep his commandments, but repays those who hate him to their faces, to destroy them. He will not delay with him who hates him. He will repay him face to face. Therefore, Israel, you shall keep the commandment, the statutes, and the judgments which I'm commanding you today to do them. So guys, I just hope that maybe that passage, just God made a choice. He elected this nation. He chose Abraham. And we're just simply coming to highlight his choice, and our desire is simply to submit to Yahweh. We want to live life his way.